Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of familiar faces out there. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Justin Hagedorn, like Paula said. I grew up on a farm just south of Flanders here, about 6 miles. And I've spent the last 6 years now teaching at Lake Area Tech in the ag department up there. The last 5 years, I've taught egg safety as one of my core classes. So I've had some experience with that. And then the last 3 years, I've headed up the precision ag department up there as well. So this is the exact same PowerPoint that Dawson's already been through. Dawson was lucky enough to come to Lake Area Tech and have me for an instructor in a couple different classes as well. So I'm going to pick on him a little bit as we're going through this. And I'm going to make sure that you help demonstrate up there when we get out there too. So you're just lucky we didn't have you buried in the grain cart right now. So. Fantastic. So some of you have probably seen different things on social media, especially after harvest of 2019, about grain that's been going into these grain bins at high moisture contents. It's coming out of the field at high moisture content. We maybe didn't get it dried down. As we're getting through the combine, some of that stuff probably is going to get ground up. There's going to be a lot of fines and that stuff as well. And as those types of things occur, you're going to have some sort of cellular respiration. And if you look up here at this picture, it's kind of difficult to see. It's a little bit grainy. But you'll notice that the third bin over from the closest side here is a little bit different color. And that bin actually was full of grain that got so hot that it actually tempered that steel. It changed out the color of that particular grain bin. So, but stuff like this has been occurring all over the upper Midwest this past couple months, simply because of the moisture content of the grain that we harvested. So this is a very real deal. This is one of the assignments. I'm not going to give you guys any homework on this, but this is one of the assignments I have my students go through and do right away. And essentially what we do is have them go online, try to find some stories that pertain to this type of an incident or this type of an occurrence. And essentially we go through and write down on the board the age group that individual was at, as well as the outcome, whether or not they survived that ordeal or not. And there's two trends that really tend to pop out. First of all is the age groups or the demographics of the individuals that do end up in these types of situations. And a lot of times it's going to be one of two things. They're going to be either under the age of 35 is a very, very common age bracket that this type of thing happens to, or also over the age of about 55 to 60. Okay. Now, there are multiple reasons that you could potentially say as far as why that is, why those different age groups are going to be the ones most affected. I'm not going to get into that. There's a lot of opinions out there. There's nothing that's really a hard and verified fact. But do know that those are the age groups that are typically going to be affected with this. And the other thing is the outcome. What happens to those individuals? It's about a 50-50 shot if they make it out of that situation alive or not. But it's ever so slightly in the favor of basically a recovery mission. It's about 52% of individuals that become entrapped in these things don't make it back out alive. So again, that's what this slide is kind of talking about. I'm just going to kind of glance over some of the stuff that we really don't need to talk about here. We will talk about this one a little bit because this is going to be the main reason that we're going to be incorporating the use of one of those coffer dams. We were out there at the city building this afternoon getting everything set up, and you guys do actually have access in the Flanders Fire Department for sure. And I'm not sure about the other departments that are here, but Flanders does have a really nice set of these things. We're going to go through their use, how to get them set up, and how to install them correctly. But essentially, we're going to be talking about angle of repose. When you're looking at a granular substance, whether that be corn, soybean, sand, gravel, doesn't matter, they're going to have a tendency to form or to slope downhill at a specific angle according or in relation to exactly parallel. And once we exceed that angle of repose, that's when grain starts flowing down. If you're looking at a vast majority of grain bin incidents, what's occurring is that grain is stuck, whether that be because of some different bacteria or different molds that are going in between the pore spaces, holding those kernels together. But for whatever reason, there's grain that's being held up at a greater than the angle of repose that it's supposed to, and then all of a sudden something's going to happen, whether that be an individual standing on it, whether that be an individual trying to poke at it from below, and all of that grain is going to eventually start sliding down. So when you're looking at the two most common grains we're going to see up here, or in this part of the world, I guess, it's going to be corn and soybeans. And those angles are about 23 and 25 degrees in comparison to parallel. There are going to be obviously some differences. If you've got high moisture grain, for example, for those of you who are farmers in this room or that have worked with farmers, if you've noticed in a grain cart or in a combine, as that grain starts peaking up, we know that that's going to be of a higher moisture content than the stuff that starts to level off a little bit more. So these are not hard and fast values, but it is kind of just something to reference a little Okay. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about real briefly is how dense this stuff actually is. If you're looking at a bushel of corn, what is a bushel of corn supposed to weigh? 56 pounds is how much one of those units of volume is supposed to weigh. And soybeans? Soybeans are supposed to be 60. And if you're looking at those bins, these bins that are out there that are holding, 30,000 or 40,000 or 100,000 bushels of grain, there gets to be a lot of mass. And when that stuff starts moving at a fairly decent rate of speed, that's when people really get in trouble and actually can get hurt pretty badly. So there's two things that could potentially happen, two outcomes if something like this were to occur, and that's going to be either an entrapment or an engulfment. Okay, an entrapment or an engulfment. Let's go through and differentiate those two terms real quick. When you're looking at an entrapment, that's a fairly easy term to understand. It's defined as the act of being caught in or as in a trap. And basically, if an individual becomes entrapped in a grain bin, they may have, maybe from the waist up being exposed, but they can't get themselves up. Maybe it's mid-chest, maybe it's neck deep, but they are not going to be able to get themselves removed from that grain. A lot of times, if that grain is flowing downhill, if you are about knee deep, that's all it takes. So it doesn't have to be very deep whatsoever. There's actually a lot of videos out there from different extension agencies, whether that be Purdue, Texas A&M has a lot of these videos on YouTube as well if you're interested in this stuff that you can watch, where they'll actually go through and do some of these trainings like we're going to do right now. But they'll have, a pretty healthy looking guy that's in there and they're drawing him down in a controlled environment, and they get to knee deep, and it's just there's no way that person can get themselves out. It's actually kind of incredible how much force that there actually is in those situations. Okay. Again, entrapment can make breathing difficult. It is not necessarily going to mandate that breathing is going to be difficult. Again, if I'm only stuck about mid-thigh, I'm not going to have any problems with my respiratory system. However, if I'm entrapped up to maybe mid-chest or even up to my neck, now I'm going to have all that force that's being pressed on my chest cavity, and it's going to make breathing very, very difficult for that individual. Okay. Some other things that could be an issue when it comes to entrapment is the temperature of that grain. Right now, the stuff that's in the grain cart out at the city building just came out of that grain bin today. I should have actually taken a temperature of that. Do you have any guesses, Dad? I'd guess maybe right around 20 to 30 degrees, somewhere in there. And that grain is going to have the tendency to not warm up or not cool down very quickly. It takes a lot of heat energy one way or the other to make that stuff move. So the stuff that's out there right now, if an individual was trapped in that for an extended period of time, hypothermia is going to be a very real concern. And that's going to be a decrease in the body temperature. Hyperthermia, if it's going to be grain that's very, very warm, that could be an issue as well. So we need to be sure that we're being mindful of that. And then the last thing is that if you actually are in that grain bin for an extended period of time, let's say that an individual is stuck in there for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, something along those lines, the amount of pressure, the sheer amount of pressure that is on that circulatory tract, the circulatory system, is going to basically develop toxins in your body or in those extremities. So if you do have a victim that becomes entrapped in those grain bins for hours on end, very, very commonly they will lose toes. They may lose the lower part of their leg, things along those lines due to that buildup. For those of you who are also first responders or trained in EMT, the application of a tourniquet, if you're familiar with that, it's kind of the same thing where you're just isolating that particular body part of that particular extremity. And again, those things start to build up in those situations as well. Okay. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Let's keep going then. We're going to differentiate again between entrapment and engulfment. In an engulfment, that individual is completely and utterly submerged in that grain mass. It's not necessarily just the fact that their head might be exposed. That's still going to be an entrapment. But as soon as their face goes under the surface of that grain, now they're engulfed. Okay. There may be a hand that's left up. That might be a situation, but by and large, an engulfment is going to be the covering of the face. And clearly, that's a much more serious thing. When you're entrapped, again, breathing may become difficult, but at least you've got a clear airspace in front of you. But as soon as you become engulfed in that grain bin, there's not going to be a lot of air left for you to survive on. You're essentially taking the oxygen that's in the pore space between those individual kernels, and that's what you're working on. Okay? It's not going to be a very good situation in that case. So that's clearly a much more serious issue, and we need to get that individual at least to the point where their face is exposed as quickly as possible. And we'll talk about it in a little bit. Okay? So far, we good? Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
One maybe simple question.
Okay.
Turning the bin fan on.
Do it. Absolutely. Yep. That is actually the second thing that the person should do. Is the first thing is make sure that that takeaway equipment gets shut off. So if it's an auger, if it's a dredging conveyor at the bottom of that pin and that sump, get that stuff shut off because that's going to stop the grain flowing downward, and that victim is not going to be submerged any deeper. The second thing is get to that fan and turn them on, because if a person is engulfed, you're at least going to be pushing new oxygen up to their upper respiratory tract, and that's going to enable them to survive, hopefully. So absolutely, turn the fans on. Okay. Let's see. How long does that take? If you're looking at an entrapment, that process, it depends obviously on how quickly that grain is being evacuated out of that container. If you're looking at a grain cart where you're unloading, 1,000 bushels in, a minute or two, that's obviously going to happen very, very quickly. If you're looking at a smaller diameter grain bin that's maybe got a 6-inch unloading auger, it's not going to take as short amount of time. But it can happen in as little as 4 seconds. Today, when Dad and I were working on getting our mannequin buried or submerged in that grain cart, it happened very, very quickly. It was actually, Dad said, "You're grimacing a little bit." I said, "This is actually really uncomfortable to watch, even though that's just a plastic doll." But it was really, really weird. Knee-deep in flowing grain. Again, flowing is the key word there. Most of you, if not all of you, have probably been in a grain bin and been up to your knees before, especially if you've jumped in or something along those lines. But the thing is, as you're jumping into that grain mass, as soon as your feet strike that grain, it pushes it away from your body rather than having that grain collapse down on your body. So knee deep in flowing grain as it's flowing down towards you is a very, very different situation. And we can go from knee deep to about waist deep in as quickly as 10 seconds in certain situations. And a person can go from standing on top of that grain mass all the way to being completely utterly submerged in as little as 20 seconds. And this is just a real quick video on something we did at Lake Area Tech a couple of years ago. We were trying to get a mannequin stuck with the same type of training for our students. But the individual that was running the trap on this particular hopper did not get it shut when I asked him to about there. And we ended up having to just completely open up the trap, let him come off the bottom. That's a really unusual thing. You're expecting that corn to come out of the bottom of a grain hopper, and all of a sudden there's this mannequin that's, for whatever reason, very anatomically correct. Okay, so what conditions could cause a dangerous scenario? There's a couple things that we need to keep in mind that we need to be mindful of, especially if you are a farmer, or if you work for a farmer, or if you work with farmers, if you see in the communities, whatever the case may be. The first thing is that grain should be dried properly when put in the store. Now, how dry that grain needs to be is utterly dependent on how long you're planning on storing. And it also depends on the crop type. If you're planning on storing grain for 6 months, let's just say we're trying to store corn for about 6 months, you should have that stuff down to about 14 to 14.5% moisture content, someplace in that range. Okay, so if it's dry when it goes in, if proper ventilation has been utilized, again, we have on the side of these grain bins, you were alluding to this a little bit ago, those large fans, those large aeration fans. If we have sized those things correctly, we can get the correct amount of airflow through. That's going to minimize the chance or the likelihood of something like this happening as well. And lastly, you want to make sure that once that grain is dried, that it stays dry. If you've gone into a grain bin in the summertime or whatever the case may be, looked up and you see a bunch of holes in that roof from maybe missing bolts, maybe the sheets are starting to rust out, whatever the case may be. If you can see light coming through any place, that's another location that water is going to come into. Okay. So again, it's making sure that that grain is dry enough when you put it in that bin and keeping it dry. That's going to be critical here. If any of those things are false, if the grain was not dry enough when put into storage, if we did not utilize proper ventilation, or if we do have leaks in that bin structure and we start having water infiltrating that storage container, now the likelihood of spoiled grain goes up, as well as the likelihood of increased dangerous situation. So what are some things that we can see? By and large, stored grain safety is going to boil down into one of two types of incidents. It's either going to be bridged or crusted grain, like we see over here on the left-hand side of your screen, or it could be walled grain. Okay. Now, if you're looking at bridged or crusted grain, what's going to happen is that as we're trying to empty that grain bin out, there is going to be a large void that starts to, I shouldn't say appear, but starts to form underneath that hardened crust. So that crust could be held in place again by bacteria, by different types of fungal pathogens, things along those lines that kind of act like cement that holds the aggregate together in concrete driveways. But it's the same thing that occurs here. It just happens that the grain is going to be the material that's held in suspension in this case. it's going to be very, very difficult to see that. We're not going to be able to see through that crust, obviously. But as an individual would get in that crust or get up on top of that, their body weight may be enough to cause that bridge or that crust to collapse, and they'll fall back into that pit or into that void. And that's how a lot of entrapments are going to occur. Another thing that could potentially occur would be wall grain. And with wall grain, we're just saying that that stuff is stuck to the outside edge of that particular structure, whether that be, maybe only 10 feet high or maybe from the bottom all the way up to the very eave of that particular storage structure, but it's going to be stuck to one side. There's been a couple different things that I've seen on social media, again, since harvest season started. And a lot of the issues that we've been seeing this year has been dealing with wall grain. There's a lot of that stuff that's actually been going on. And we've talked about this at home too, that it has happened to a few people within our communities in the last year or two as well, that they have had walled grain appear in their grain bins. Okay? So those are going to be the two most dangerous situations that you could potentially see. So what's the safest way to deal with that stuff? If you notice that there is a crust that's formed in that grain bin, or if you notice that there is walled grain that's being formed in there, the worst thing you can do is enter that grain bin and try to repair it, try to get it fixed. You don't want to get into that grain bin. And the simple fact of that is the fact that if something were to collapse, if something were to move, it's going to happen very, very quickly, and you're not going to have time to react. Okay? So the easiest way, the safest way to deal with the stuff is to, by not entering the grain bin, usually a long pole through either the top, the fill port of this bin here, or at the manhole, and you're going to try to attempt to break some chunks of that material down. We, again, don't want to get in there. If you've ever heard of anybody trying to get in there and walk grain down to the sump, walk it down to the center, that's a terrible idea, and don't let them do that. Okay. But that's what we're going to do. You also do not want to attempt to knock wall grain down from the side door. If you got the grain down to the point where you can open that side door and you can reach through and try to poke at something, that's not a very safe location either. There have been documented cases where as a wall of grain is collapsed, it's collapsed with enough force that it shot through that side door and actually killed people outside because it was so much force. Just basically blunt force trauma right there. So the safest way to deal with grain, if it does get out of condition, is to stay above it and outside of the structure. That's the best place to be. Let's see, we're not going to look at this one necessarily. Let's look at this slide. We'll start here because this is kind of where you guys come in as far as the emergency response personnel are concerned. So if something were to happen, if I was in the grain bin and something were to happen to me, if I got stuck, if I was submerged, if I was entrapped, engulfed, whatever the case would be, and let's just say that I've got Dad working with me out there on the farm too, he needs to do three things in very, very rapid succession in order for me to have the best chance of survival. The first thing that needs to happen is he needs to get to that tractor or that electric motor disconnect, whatever the case would be, however that's going to be running, and he needs to get that takeaway equipment shut off. Okay. Now that's going to do one thing for me, a really big thing for me. That's going to stop the flow of grain. It's not going to continue being drawn down in the center. And because of that, I'm not going to be pulled down into that cone any further either. So if he can get there when I'm only stuck maybe knee deep, I'm not going to go down any further. If he would just let that keep running, it's going to get up to my waist, it's going to get up to my chest, it's going to get up to my neck, and eventually I'm going to be completely and utterly engulfed. So the very first thing that anybody needs to do if you know of an issue to bin is get that takeaway equipment shut off. The second thing that needs to happen is, like you said, turn the bin fans up. And the reason we're doing that is to supply fresh oxygen to those individuals as they're entrapped or as they're engulfed. Again, if you're looking at an engulfment situation where a person is completely and utterly under that grain, underneath the surface there, there's going to be so much force on their chest cavity. It's going to be very, very difficult for them to take good breaths anyway. It's going to be very, very shallow. And if we're running out of oxygen right away because we didn't turn those fans on and you're dealing with those shallow breaths, it's not going to be a very pretty situation. So make sure those bin fans get turned on. Be pumping as much fresh oxygen to them as you possibly can. And then lastly, what I'm hoping Dad will do is call 911. Okay. And then when you individuals get out there as rescue personnel, just verify that these previous steps have already been taken. Make sure that that equipment is shut off and make sure that the bin fans have been turned on. Okay. If they have not been taken into consideration yet, if you guys get to a situation where either of those two things is false, make sure you rectify them as soon as you possibly can. That's going to increase that individual's chance of survival. If you're looking at an engulfment, again, that's going to be an individual that's completely and utterly submerged in that grain mass. The number one concern or the number one priority that a rescue team should have in that situation is to verify that that individual is no longer in danger of suffocation. And the easiest way to do that is to make sure that the grain is pulled away from at least their torso. Again, if they're stuck at the waist, they're not going to get out quite yet, but at least they can breathe. That's going to be our number one priority, is making sure that we get to that point. In order to do this, we are going to cut holes in the sides of the bin. Okay? You'll notice that in this particular image here, there's been a couple holes that have been cut in the side. And I do also want to make sure that you guys understand that those holes are shaped triangular for a very specific reason. Okay? Actually, two specific reasons. The first one is they're going to be the quickest cuts to make, because all I need to do is make 2 cuts. If I'm trying to cut squares out, now I've got to make 3 cuts. So triangles work best because we can get them cut in there as quickly as possible. The other thing that is beneficial with a triangular shaped hole like this is that if I start with a fairly small triangle up here and that grain is flowing away but not as quickly as I would like to, I can cut that triangle wider and wider and wider. And I can meter or control the amount of grain that's coming out of each one of those ports or those holes I just created. Okay. Now, Hollis was asking me, well, is that really in that individual's best interest? Is that going to help that individual come out of that grain bin alive? And the answer is, well, yes. The reason is, if you're going to be an individual that's stuck in a grain bin, very, very commonly, you're going to be in the very center. You're going to be in the middle, right over the sump of that grain bin. And in that location, as we're emptying our grain bins, typically, when we're just running straight down to the center, that individual is going to be pulled down with that grain mass. If, however, we cut these holes around the outside perimeter of that bin, now that grain's flowing away from that individual. Okay, so that's going to eventually, hopefully, get down to the point where that individual's torso is exposed. So again, we're going to be looking at triangular shaped holes. They should be placed on the opposite sides of the bin structure. So if I've got one over here, I need to be exactly 180 degrees away in order to cut another hole in that grain bin. If I'm going to try cutting 3, they should be 120 degrees apart. If I'm cutting 4, they should be 90 degrees apart, so on and so forth. And that's simply so as that grain is flowing out of that structure, it's not going to be flowing out in an ununiform fashion. I don't want there to be a lot more grain on one side of the bin than there is on this side, because now I run the risk of that structure collapsing on that individual. And that not only puts that individual at more risk, but also the rescue personnel that are working on this mission as well. Okay, so make sure that they are on opposite sides of that structure. Another thing that we need to keep in mind here is that if you're cutting these holes and only 100 bushels or so comes out, that may or may not be enough. You may have to have somebody with a loader tractor or a payloader or a skid steer or something along those lines working on each one of these holes, each one of these ports, to keep that grain flowing downward. Because again, we're only going to go so far. We're going to continue to drain grain in this fashion until the victim's torso at least is exposed. If you want to keep going, you're more than welcome to. But again, we want to keep this process going until that person's torso is exposed and they can breathe without any struggle or without any difficulty. Okay, so the questions on this? No? Okay. Some of the things that my students have always asked is, well, how do you make those holes? How do you make those cuts? If you have, maybe you've got a pneumatic air hammer or something along those lines that's got one of those 2 bits that you put in there, you can use one of those. If you have we have a steel max saw, steel max circular saw at the farm. They are carbide tips, basically steel saw that's designed to cut metal, something like that would work. If you guys have like concrete saws or access to something like that, that would work. If you don't have any of those things, just take a loader tractor and start ramming the hell out of that bin. Get those things opened up. Literally, if that's what you have to work with, that's what you got to do. So however you need to do that, just make sure you're getting that grain drawn away from that individual until they're no longer going to be in any issue as far as the bin is concerned. Once we get to that point, or if it was an entrapment in the first place, if they were only buried up to their knees, up to their waist, maybe up to their mid-chest right away, you're never going to want to just walk up to that individual and grab their arm and start pulling. Because if an individual is stuck even waist deep, it's going to take a minimum of 400 pounds of force plus their body weight to extract them from that unit. So, you know, I can understand where you think, okay, well, I can see this individual, I can just put maybe an upper body harness on their body and just try winching them out. That's not the thing to do, because the human body is not designed to be pulled apart with that much force. Okay. The other thing is, in something like that case, Deadlifting 400 pounds is not something that I can do. So you're probably going to want to have at least 1 or 2 people around that situation to even think about doing that, but it's not even worth doing so. The other thing that we need to be mindful of here is that you need to approach that victim very carefully. So if you're looking at, or if you go, Chase and I, let's go, because you and I graduated high school together here. So if you were looking back to Mr. Wong's class, physical science, you remember talking about Newtonian physics there? No, yeah. I see what you were doing there, right? To be honest with you, I remember him talking about it, but I didn't really pay attention to what he was saying. Newton's third law of motion states that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, correct? So as you're taking those steps in that grain, you're going to sink down a little bit, correct? And as you're sinking down, what's happening is that my body is pushing weight or putting force on that grain, and that grain is being spread out, it's being dissipated. Now, to counter the force of my body being pressed into that corn, the corn's pushing back. It's got to push back, or else it just keeps sinking, right? The problem with that is, as that grain is being pushed back or pushing back against my body, it too has to be pushing against something. So what happens is, if you've got somebody that's stuck up to their chest and you just walk right up to them, every footstep you take, as you get closer and closer and closer, it's pushing more and more force on their chest cavity. So you're going to want to make sure that you have something that is going to dissipate your body weight. Now, it could be, think of it kind of like a snowshoe. You're probably not going to want to have those things in there. But out of the city building here, I've got some pop flats. Those have a tendency to work very, very well for a multitude of reasons. But primarily it's because they have some 3D texturing. If you flip them upside down, they have something that bites in that corner. It's not going to act like a snowboard and slide up and down that hill for you. The other thing is, seeing as they're perforated, you're not going to have a solid surface for those kernels of corn or those soybeans to land on and end up acting like roller bears. So you guys are going to be skidding along on top of those as well. So that's going to be something that I would suggest looking into, just making sure you've got access to something like that. Probably, I'm going to guess 8 or 10 of them, something along those lines. We've got 5 of them out there, and we'll kind of talk about why that is or show you guys how to use those as we get there. But you do want to be mindful of the fact that you want to approach the victim carefully. The other thing is, if they're already in a situation where it's pretty precarious, there may be another wall that's about ready to collapse. If you're getting that individual to the point where they are exposed and then you bury them back up incidentally because you're not being very cautious about the situation, that's not going to give them a whole lot of hope either. It's going to be a fairly negative type of a reaction there. So, and then what we're going to do is we're going to utilize a safety tube or a barrier device of some sort. These could be some fancy interlocking tubes. There are some manufacturers out there that make these tubes that you'll assemble as a unit. They'll have some over center straps. You'll clamp them together, and they just basically form one rigid tube, and then you kind of work its way down into that grain mass. If you don't have something like this, you could utilize even something as simple as basically a plywood barrier, just something to keep that grain from blowing back in around that individual. And the reason we're going to use this again is because if you are stuck, if the victim is stuck, they're typically going to be in the center of that bin, down at the very bottom of that inverted cone as we're trying to remove grain. And if you're down at the bottom of that inverted cone and you take a scoop shovel and you throw it over your shoulder, what happens to that corn? It runs right back down to where you took that shovel from, right? So what we're trying to do is basically prevent that grain from collapsing back around that individual as we're removing it. Okay. Now, the means of removal are going to vary. It depends on what you guys have access to in your different departments and your different locations. You could have a grain back or a shot back. That's what we're going to use. Not a grain back, excuse me. I do mean a shot back. It's a very distinct difference there. But that's what we're going to use out here. I've got a shot back we're going to use to get the grain removed away from around that mannequin that we've got trapped. You could use scoops if you've got feed scoops like we were talking about. If you've got ice cream pails, whatever the case would be. If you just have a head on your head, take it off, start trying to scoop that stuff out. It doesn't matter what you have, just try to get that grain away from that individual as quickly as possible. Okay. What you're going to do as well here is you're not just going to get down to maybe knee deep and start pulling. But again, you're going to want to make sure that that victim is able to help get themselves extracted if they're responsive at all. You don't want to take a lot of force because, again, that individual's body, their spine is not designed to be pulled apart with that much force. So again, don't just get down to waist deep and start yanking. Try to get down a little bit further if you can. Another thing that I should note when it comes to this particular slide is if the victim is responsive, if they are capable of giving you directions, you're gonna want to ask them where their body is oriented, because it's fairly. We'll talk about this actually on the next slide too, but it's fairly natural for an individual to want to try to help themselves out of that situation, even though it's probably not going to do much good. So you're going to see a lot of times that individuals get stuck with legs sticking out at weird angles and arms being stuck out because they're trying to climb out of that gradient until the last second. And this stuff is going to, again, set in very, very tightly. It's going to be difficult to install that copper down through that gradient as it is, much less trying to push that thing through somebody's feet. Okay, so try to figure out where they're at, where their bodies are at, where their legs are at, where their arms are at, things along those lines. So as you're trying to install this, you're not going to injure that individual and make it a little bit easier for you to get that copper dam or that barrier device installed as well. Let's see. You guys, the one that Planter, I guess, the one that we were working with out there, you'll notice that one of the sheets when we get out there has a ladder segment on the inside. You're going to want to make sure that that one is in front of the individual because it doesn't do them any good if it's back here. So that's going to be something else to be mindful of. This one has a ladder feature all the way around. The one that the school has doesn't have a ladder feature whatsoever. That's just a very, very, very slick piece of plastic that you're going to slide around the individual. So you guys actually have a pretty nice setup here. I do like what you guys have there so far. Okay. So just a few things to keep in mind, just some things we need to be mindful of as you're looking at these situations. First of all, we're going to start with the victim. Again, I know that some of you are probably going to end up going to grade bins yourselves. Some of you know people from your communities, whether that be from church, whether that be from your kids' baseball games or basketball games, whatever the case may be. Some of you work for farmers. Some of you are going to work for businesses that cater to farmers. That's all fine and dandy, but you are probably going to have some interaction with these individuals at some point in time. So if they're ever in a situation that they're talking about the grain bin that they have that's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, if it doesn't store like it was supposed to have been stored, just try to remind them of a few different things. So if you're getting stuck, if an individual is actually being drawn down into that grain bin, you're going to want to try to keep your legs and your arms as close to the center line of your body as possible. And again, that's so as the rescues are coming back and trying to put this particular copper dam or this particular barrier device in place, it's going to be that much easier because, again, you're not going to have a leg sticking out of the 45-degree angle someplace really random. Okay, so try to remain as close to a perfectly straight line as you possibly can. Try to cover your face or your nostrils, your upper respiratory tract with either your hands, cup them around your mouth like that. If you've got a hat on, you can take it off and try to leave a little bit of room in front of your face with that. But you're going to want to try to do something to keep those individual kernels or those individual grains going up in your nose or coming in your mouth, because that's going to make breathing that much more difficult. It's already not going to be a cakewalk, but it gets even tougher if you are in that situation. Take shallow breaths to prevent that grain from collapsing around you again. If you exhale very, very deeply and you're trying to get another breath of air in, it's not going to go very well. You want to try to keep your chest as full of as much air as possibly can, and just take those very, very shallow breaths and try to stay as calm as you possibly can. Now, again, in that situation, it's going to be very, very difficult to keep from losing your cool, but it's going to be in your best interest to try to remain as calm as possible. You're going to utilize the least amount of oxygen in that place. For the rescuer, that's going to be you guys. If you are going to be called out to a situation like this, if you're being called out to one of these locations, to a situation, make sure the fans are on again, and make sure that they remain on the entire time of your rescue to begin to deliver oxygen to that individual. Work quickly but carefully. Again, time is of the essence here. The quicker we can get an individual out, obviously, the more likely they are to survive the ordeal. But also be very, very careful, because the only thing worse than one victim is what? Two. You're exactly right. So be very, very quick, but also be very, very mindful of what else is going on. Keep an eye on changing conditions within the bin. Okay. Again, if there is still a crust and maybe a small piece that does not collapse, be very, very cautious. Be very, very mindful of that particular location. And no matter how bad that situation is, never give up. There was a documented case, and I'll send Hollis the link to this as well. But there was a documented case of an individual named Eric Baker. He was 22 at the time, down in Eldora, Iowa, which is just north of Ames, maybe 35, 40 minutes. And he was going into a grain bin a couple summers ago and was entrapped in there. Completely, I shouldn't say entrapped, he was engulfed in there. And did you watch this in your class? Yeah. I don't think I had time this year to watch it. Yeah, he had a very specific type of mask on. And that individual was in that green bin for about 4 hours before they were able to get him back out. So it's really, truly something. So again, no matter how bad the situation looks, don't assume that it's a recovery mission, because miracles do happen and people survive things that are unthinkable. Okay. Let's see. That's about it as far as my PowerPoint. Again, I tried to run through it as quickly as I possibly could. That usually takes about 3 days or so. I'll take care of the exact, so I understand if there are any questions, that's what I'll keep up right now for any of those.
Probably get someone to go down there.
I'm sorry, what?
Probably get questions.
Okay, that's fair. Absolutely. Yep. Okay. Let's see. Hollis was asking me to show you guys a difference. We were talking previously about how to extract grain from within this safety tube. I know some of you on the Flanders Fire Department have been looking at this, but there are going to be devices that are created now. Oh, fantastic. Oh, I know why. I turned my personal hotspot off. So I'll turn it back on. We'll, I'll just talk while it's trying to get loaded up here. And what this auger is, how it works, is that it is a device that you can stick inside of that cofferdam as an individual is trying to become extracted from it. And there's a couple different variants I think you've seen. You saw one of them that was made of PVC and that had a hand crank on it, correct? So that would not necessarily require you to have anything else or anything extra to get that process taken care of. This model that we're going to be looking at real quick. Probably that loud. But this one's just powered by a cordless drill of some sort. That's really, really loud. But again, something like this is going to speed that process, make it a little bit quicker to get that individual extracted. I guess I don't know how much more you want me to talk about that, but that is something that would be, I feel, very beneficial to any department that already has one of these cofferdams in place as well. Like you said there, it just makes that process a lot quicker. They're a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to get up into that grain bin because, again, with the shop vac, you're dealing with, a shop vac that's maybe this big and a manhole that's maybe this big, and then, it doesn't work very well that way. Potentially, you could go through the top, but if you've got an in-bin spreader or something along those lines, that's going to make fitting that shop vac in there fairly difficult as well. Something like this, I believe that's a 3-inch diameter auger. And the bottom is 5 inches or so in diameter, and that spout is maybe a foot or so in length. So it is going to fit into a lot more confined situations or spaces than a shop vac would. So something like that is something that's, I believe that we should have.
It does move a bushel and a half a minute.
1.5 bushel.
With the spark of the shop vac and all the dust that's in there.
You could potentially see that, yeah. Yep, that's certainly an issue. Obviously it's going to depend on how much dust there actually is in the air. And speaking of the dust that you are going to see in those situations, sometimes it may be just plain grain dust, and that stuff is not necessarily damaging your health. But if we do have a situation where maybe there was some mold or something like that in that grain, some of those mold spores are going to be fairly damaging to your health as well. So I'd recommend having some sort of a particulate filter that you can wear on your face, whether that be something as simple as a regular dust mask. You might want to even step up to maybe a respirator of some sort. I wouldn't necessarily say that an SCBA would be out of the question in those situations, but that may be overkill for a lot of different applications. But you're going to want to have some sort of respiratory protection on you, as well as, if you can, get it on the individual that's stuck as well as quickly as possible, just to try to keep some of those mold spores from entering their respiratory system.
Having the fans on help get some of that.
It will. It'll be pushing some of that stuff out. When you're looking at some of these bin fans, you can see airflow rates of 20,000 CFM pretty easily in some of those big fans. And if you're looking at a fairly decent sized bin, you may have multiple fans on there as well. So you are moving a very, very large volume of air. Like you said, that is going to be removing some of those spores. But if there's still some rotting grain down below you, it's going to be continuously forcing those spores up to your your bubble as well, for lack of a better term for that. So, but you're right. Turning the fans on will help with that as well. It'll purify the air somewhat. So, okay. Full body harness. I would recommend that we have those as well for the individuals that are going into that green bin to help try to rescue that individual. Again, if you've got something that's like a fall protection device where you can walk pretty easily, it goes up and down pretty nicely until it has a very sudden jerk on that tether, and then it locks into place. Something like that probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to have either. Just to try to help the rescue individuals to prevent them from being a victim as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I was going to bring up. Yeah, you want all the rigging that is associated with that as well. I'm by no means an expert in any of that stuff. I obviously couldn't help you with that. But I'm sure I can find somebody that I can put you in touch with, whether that be CHS, Integra, all those locations have their own safety coordinators that deal with this on a much more daily basis than I do. So I can reach out to those individuals and get kind of a list together as well, if that's something you'd be interested in doing.
I don't think it'd be a bad idea for us all to look at what we have versus what we probably should have.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to talk about while we're in here. And nothing else is really coming to me. So unless you guys have any other questions for here, I guess I would ask calls if we could head over to the city building and go through some in-person training.
We're gonna head around back to the city office. Everybody knows where that is, right? Go down to the locker, take a ride.
We're up here on the ladder truck. You can see that this individual is clearly submerged pretty well. That would still technically be just an entrapment because the individual is still above the surface of the green. But seeing as that individual is stuck that far, at this point, I think I would still recommend going through and trying to get some of those holes cut inside of the bin, especially if this is a fairly large structure. I don't think that'd be very appreciative if we tried cutting holes in this, all right?
Not tonight.
Not tonight? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start by trying to get this individual ready for a rescue. Again, for those of you who are in here with me, let's see, right here, there's going to be a brace that goes across. So as you're moving back and forth, be mindful of that. Don't trip over it and crash over to the side here, nothing like that. That's going to be fun. But what we're going to do is go ahead and start handing those sections up here to our rescuers. For those of you who are down here with those ready to wait. Full of corn already. We'll get these set up, kind of just set over here for right now.
Got corn on your food? Huh? Got corn on there? No. Justin, this one that you have has
Yep, that's why I'm holding.
the label has the timer on the inside.
Yep, that's got the ladder rungs on the inside as well. The other sheets are going to have leg holds on the outside here. That's going to be for the individuals here that are doing the rescue to drive that into the grain mass itself. But again, you do want to make sure that the one that has the sticker on the front and the ladder rung on the inside facing the front of that individual. So again, remember we said that as we're approaching this victim, we want to be as careful as we possibly can be, correct? Because again, as you guys are sinking in a little bit, the amount of weight that our bodies are expending on that corn is being pushed in all directions, basically from your foot. And again, as we get too close to this individual, we're going to start pushing unnecessary force on his chest, and it's going to make it more difficult for him to breathe than it already is. So we're going to use, again, pop flats. They do provide some support this way. They're going to slide down the hill because they are going to be shaped like this. They're also not going to lend themselves to being very slippery because of the fact that we have some texture there, as well as the fact that grain can flow back to them. So as I'm sticking these, they go right back on top of that grain mass. I'm not going to sink in hardly at all. And again, that's just to look at trying to displace some of that force of our body weight. Okay. So again, we're going to go ahead and start with this tube right here. And I'm going to put this directly in front of the individual, as close as I possibly can to him. When we were getting that thing stuck today, what we did is we have a fairly long boom on our skid steer. So we had this thing hanging clear up in the air and set it down in here. And we just brought him down in maybe 6-inch intervals at a time. So he should be fairly vertical in here. He's missing an arm, so don't be alerted about that, okay? He's already missing an arm. This guy obviously didn't pay attention in farm safety back in high school. So we're going to set this one here, and then we're just going to start interlocking the rest of these panels around the outside. You're going to notice that on the footholds, we want the flat to be on the top side. We don't want those angles. Those should be towards the bottom. Those are just going to be basically gussets or bracing as we're trying to force these things in around that individual. Okay? So go ahead and start setting those on top of these. You're going to want to leave these up a little bit right away because, again, we're not sure what the curvature is going to dictate that these are for a spacing right away. Okay, and then we got one left here. Let's think about that one. Okay. So you might want to lift some of these out just a little bit. Okay. Get them around an individual. And again, we're going to want to try to maneuver this thing until it's perfectly round. Right now, we've kind of got an egg shape. So Chase, you might want to start pushing yours over this way just a touch. There we go. That's pretty good. Okay. And then again, with these footholds that are on the outside, wherever you're at, I'm just going to have you guys go ahead and stand on those. And we'll just kind of take turns bouncing until we get these things basically seated all the way down into this grain match here. You might be on top of that brace there.
Yeah, we are.
Are we on top of that brace here?
It's right here.
Okay. So we'll have to go this way just a touch. Did you get yours started that time? A little further?
Which arm is he missing?
He's missing the one that counts here. He'll be all right there.
He's missing this one.
Yep.
Okay. I was gonna say he might be missing.
Can you turn it so the footholds are a little shallower? They're gonna cast.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh yeah, you see.
Yeah.
Can you turn it a little bit? Maybe just turn it. There, that'll help a little bit.
Okay.
I didn't think of those.
It'll be close. We'll give her a shot. Let's just try to force out as much as we can. There's really not a good way to do this because, again, that grain is really packed around here. And if this grain was in a larger structure and there was that much more force on top of it, it'd be even more difficult to do so. Yeah, but not by much. I'm hitting by an inch. Okay. Well, let's see here. We gotta get them out of there, right?
Now
Okay.
we suck it in.
Sorry.
Closer and closer to the break.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so
It won't get any worse.
yeah, exactly. Let's go ahead and try moving it just a little bit further.
Pulling out.
Yep.
Real one.
There. Remember we said that nothing worse than one victim is two victims, right?
What are you doing, Doc? I'm the smart one. There's
You gotta end up with one arm too.
No.
trying to push the heat down.
Well, we're getting past those braces now, aren't we?
Yeah. That feels fun.
As you take grain out, you work them down.
Yeah, we'll do that too. So Okay, so we got that pushed down to a certain level. Like you said, that's a good start. So now we'll grab that shot back. Right over here.
They're coming.
Okay.
Coming in the back. Or I don't know.
Right here.
Oh. You're ready. Perfect.
Dawson's got the cord over there. Get this off. Make sure that it's sealed against the body of the back itself. Okay, and then just like that, ready to get started? Yeah, Justin. Hey, wherever the stocking puts down in that section. I'll get on that, yeah. Okay. Come on. Yeah, it should. Ready? Oh, not yet. Big truck. There is more panels over there, but obviously the larger line you get as well, the more authority it is to push around and start changing the light. Hey, keep going there, Doss. So for those of you out here, we got them about to there's waste right now, so we're making progress. It might get to the point, Josh, where you're gonna have to crawl in there too.
Getting in with
So we're gonna send Chase down here with Jake. And Chase is gonna do two things. He's gonna keep working, and he's also gonna provide encouragement, right? Yep. Okay. Yeah.
You probably won't wonder, you know.
It's good yet?
Yeah.
How about cheese? How about cheese? Cheese doing good?
Start a couple underneath now. Oh yeah, okay. So where are you at on Jake? Mid thigh yet? Okay.
Get off the rack.
Let's see. So, yep. That's right.
I don't think my side's going down any further.
Mine went down another couple inches at least. You said Jake's down about mid thigh? Okay. Oh, you got it.
Mine's not going down.
Yeah, as you say, the schools has a slide hammer for that as well. They do work to pound those in. You want to make sure you have auditory protection there because those things are incredibly loud when they ring. So, yep.
Can you stack these if the guy? Because we have a whole other set or something to go wider.
I think that's to go wider because if you're trying to stack two of these on top of each other, that person's already 5-6 feet down. You'll never know where they're at. So you're just kind of shooting blindly at that point.
So if you don't know their orientation, you're better off going wider.
Yes. Yep.
Make
Like I
bigger
said,
holes in the side of the
Yeah,
bin,
cut
I would
the
say.
holes in the side of the bin. You want to get them down to at least chest level before you start doing this process. So, well, you got down to a couple inches. Should we try it again?
Yeah.
Okay. If you get Jake down to about knee level, well, carefully try to get him out. Ready? Okay. I have no idea what happened. That was like that when I picked him up. You know what? I've got these things that work with it when you got most, and I'm places that was no. I've changed this stuff. It was standing. No, it's standing. You know? It's not moving. You wiggle enough. Really? I'll be down. I know when they combine that stuff, it just starts hard whacking on it. It's crazy stuff. I'm running a lot of fun. Got one? When I look at the big one, it's not. That's pretty tough. Is it still coming through the side there, or are we getting further down? Okay, perfect. Empty what? Perfect. Okay. Ready? Now here. Did you see it knees yet? Did you see it knees yet? Pretty close. Big guys.
Donnie? Donnie?
Oh, don't rip his head off. Oh, the arm come off.
Come on, Jake.
Like that.
Perfect.
Yeah. He's even got Levi's on.
He does.
We have shoes.
Okay. So we got him out.
Oh, Jesus.
You're still breathing. He's
Yeah,
looking good.
Yeah. So he's fresh from material ordeal here. So when you're looking at this point, ideally the individual is going to be able to walk out of the bin under their own power if they're still responsive. If they're not, obviously you got to get them out. But if they are responsive and they're saying, okay, I'm out, I want to go see my family now, make sure they get into an ambulance or something right away, because again, it's just like having a tourniquet on your leg. All that pressure is going to stop that circulation, and we're going to have some issues at that point. So,
Like the bins from deep sea diving.
yeah, exactly, same thing. So, okie doke. So, Chase, you done good? Coming out, bud.
And you just put your face in there and go.
Yeah.
You know, that hole wasn't very big. Each one of the greenbacks that they took out was probably at least a bushel. So it's amazing how much volume is in there with the body.
Yep. So, okay, so that was that. Is there any questions for me? Like I said, the shot vac does work. It's not necessarily the recommended method, simply because, as you guys saw, it takes some time to get that process done, right? If you had something that was, like I said, that auger that does a bushel and a half per minute, this process, it would have gone a little bit quicker. Another thing that we need to be mindful of is, as you're getting this safety tube or this barrier device installed in the first place, again, you want to get the one with the ladder rungs in front of the individual, and get the rest of them lined up and make sure that they're pretty well parallel, because otherwise it does start to bind as you're going into that grading mass, which I think is part of our issue here. So, but
Yeah, I don't think anything bigger than an ice cream bucket you wouldn't be able to.
no, not when you get down in that far. So, Jake's not a big guy.
I think one of those heat scoops would actually work the best. The little handle.
Yep. So, absolutely. So, any other questions for me? Nope. Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Well, that's all I had for you guys for tonight. So, I appreciate you guys having me. Paulus, did you want to talk about what happened earlier today?
Yeah. I don't know if you guys are all